In East Texas, a 72-year-old widow was about to discover her own children's betrayal. What started as a family visit took a shocking turn when she came face to face with systematic manipulation. Meredith Caldwell wasn't your typical elderly victim. For 35 years, she had shaped young minds as a high school principal, known for exposing deception. When she encountered her son secretly recording her confused moments, she had no idea she was walking into a scheme to steal her inheritance. Meredith's response, launching her own surveillance operation, would lead to a family war exposing elder abuse. What began as concern would become a psychological thriller of hidden cameras and financial theft. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Meredith Caldwell's Victorian home, casting delicate shadows across the hardwood floors that she and Harold had refinished together 37 years ago. At 72, Meredith still moved with the purposeful stride of a woman who had spent decades commanding classrooms full of restless teenagers, though today something felt different. Her children were coming to visit, all three of them together, which hadn't happened since Harold's funeral 3 years ago. She smoothed her silver hair and adjusted the reading glasses perched on her nose as she surveyed her kitchen. A few dishes sat in the sink from her morning coffee, and yesterday's newspaper lay folded on the counter beside a stack of mail she'd been meaning to sort. Nothing unusual, but she found herself seeing it through fresh eyes, wondering what her children would think. The sound of car doors slamming in her driveway interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she watched David emerge from his silver BMW, his insurance salesman's smile already in place. Sarah climbed out of the passenger side, her nurse practitioner's uniform crisp despite the Texas heat, while Tommy's beat-up pickup truck pulled in behind them. Her youngest son looked uncomfortable even from this distance, his broad shoulders hunched as he followed his older brother toward the front door. "Mom!" David's voice boomed as he entered without knocking, a habit that had irritated Harold but which Meredith had learned to tolerate. "How are you feeling today?" There was something in his tone, too bright, too concerned, that made her former educator instincts prickle. In 35 years of teaching, she'd heard that same artificial cheerfulness from students who were about to ask for an extension on a paper they hadn't written. "I'm fine, David, same as I was yesterday when you called." She accepted his brief hug, noting how his eyes swept the kitchen behind her. "Sarah, honey, you didn't need to come straight from work." Sarah's smile was professional, the kind she probably used with difficult patience. "We wanted to check on you, Mom. You sounded a little scattered on the phone yesterday." Meredith frowned. She remembered their conversation clearly. David had called to ask about Harold's insurance papers, and she'd told him they were in the filing cabinet in the study, same place they'd always been. "I wasn't scattered. I knew exactly where those documents were." "Of course you did," David said quickly, too quickly. "We just worry about you being out here all alone. This house is so big, and after Dad—" He let the sentence hang, but his eyes were moving again, taking inventory of the kitchen counter, the pile of mail, the few unwashed dishes. Tommy finally spoke up, his voice gentle but strained. "Hey, Mom, you look good." Unlike his brother, he met her eyes, but something flickered there. Guilt, maybe? It was the same expression he'd worn as a boy when he'd broken something and was trying to hide it. "Sit down, all of you. I'll make coffee." Meredith moved toward the cabinet where she kept the good cups, the ones Harold had bought her for their 25th anniversary. As she reached up, she felt a moment of dizziness and steadied herself against the counter. Sarah was beside her in an instant. "Are you taking your blood pressure medication correctly, Mom?" That looked like a hypotensive episode. "I'm fine. Just stood up too fast." But even as she said it, Meredith wondered if she had taken her morning pills. The days sometimes blurred together since Harold died, and without his gentle reminders, she occasionally forgot things that had once been automatic. "Maybe you should sit down," Sarah said, her hand firm on Meredith's arm. "Let me make the coffee. Where do you keep it?" As Sarah bustled around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone accustomed to taking charge, Meredith noticed David had his phone out. The small click of a camera shutter was barely audible, but her trained ear caught it. He was photographing her kitchen, The unwashed dishes, the scattered mail, the general lived-in appearance of a woman who no longer had anyone to impress. "David, what are you doing with that phone?" His smile never wavered. "Just taking a few pictures for Jennifer. You know how she worries about you from all the way out in Seattle? I thought I'd send her some photos so she can see you're doing well." But he wasn't photographing her. He was documenting what he clearly saw as evidence of decline, of a woman losing her grip on domestic order. Meredith felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the pattern. She'd seen it in her own classroom when administrators came to observe struggling teachers. They weren't looking for success. They were building a case. "Where are your reading glasses, Mom?" Tommy asked suddenly. "I thought you always kept them on that little table by your chair." Meredith looked toward the living room. Her glasses weren't on the side table where she always left them. They must be upstairs. I was reading in bed last night." "I'll get them," Tommy offered, but there was something too eager in his voice. He disappeared up the stairs, while Sarah continued making coffee with movements that suggested familiarity with Meredith's kitchen that she shouldn't have had. How often has Sarah been here? Meredith wondered, but pushed the thought aside as paranoid. "Mom, where do you keep your keys?" David asked. "I wanted to check your car. Tommy mentioned the tire looked low when he was here last week." "On the hook by the door. Same place they've been for 20 years. But when she looked, the hook was empty. "That's strange. I drove to the grocery store yesterday." "Are you sure?" Sarah's voice carried professional concern. "Sometimes, when we're tired or stressed, we can think we did things we didn't actually do." The suggestion made Meredith's cheeks burn. She knew she'd driven to the store. She remembered buying groceries, remembered loading them in the car, remembered the young man who'd helped her carry the bags to the car when she struggled with them. But doubt crept in anyway, the insidious whisper that maybe Sarah was right. Maybe she was becoming like Harold in those final years. Tommy returned with her reading glasses, but his face was flushed, and he avoided her gaze. "Found them on your dresser." "Thank you, sweetheart." She put them on, and immediately the world came into sharper focus, including the expression on David's face as he watched her fumble with things she'd been handling competently for decades. As they sat around her kitchen table drinking coffee, the conversation felt wrong. Her children's questions were too pointed, too focused on her daily routines, her ability to manage her medications, her memory of recent events. It reminded her of the psychological evaluations she'd had to conduct on students she suspected of cheating, all aimed at establishing incompetence. "We've been talking," David began, and Meredith's blood chilled at the careful way he said it, "and we think it might be time to explore some options for additional support." "What kind of options?" "Well, there are some beautiful assisted living communities not far from here. Places where you'd have help with medications, meals, housekeeping. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big house all by yourself." Sarah nodded encouragingly. From a medical standpoint, it makes sense. As we age, our cognitive function naturally declines, and it becomes harder to manage complex tasks safely. "I'm not declining," Meredith said firmly. "I'm managing just fine." "Of course you are." David's tone was patronizing, the same voice he'd used when she'd caught him in lies as a teenager. "But wouldn't it be nice not to have to worry about it? To have people looking out for you?" She looked at Tommy, hoping for support, but he was staring at his coffee cup as if it held the secrets of the universe. The guilt was written all over his face, and suddenly she understood. This wasn't a spontaneous visit motivated by concern. This was a planned intervention, carefully choreographed to make her appear incompetent. After they left, David promising to look into some options, and Sarah suggesting she think about what we discussed, Meredith sat alone in her kitchen and tried to process what had just happened. Her children, the people she'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, had come to her home to build a case against her competency. She walked through the house, checking things. Her keys were in Tommy's truck. She could see them through the window, sitting on his dashboard. Her reading glasses had been moved upstairs, though she never read in bed anymore because it hurt her neck. Small things, easily explained away as forgetfulness, but deliberately orchestrated. As she climbed the stairs to retrieve her keys from where she now remembered leaving them, on her bedside table after reading the newspaper that morning, she heard voices from the front yard. David and Sarah were standing by his car, their heads close together in urgent conversation. Meredith crept to her bedroom window and cracked it open slightly. "Needs to be documented," Sarah was saying. "Everything has to look legitimate when we file the papers." "The timeline is tight," David replied. "My creditors aren't going to wait much longer, and if she starts getting suspicious, she won't. Look at her today. She couldn't even find her glasses or keys. We just need to keep pushing until she cracks." Meredith's hands gripped the windowsill as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. This wasn't about her welfare or her safety. This was about money. Her money, Harold's insurance. The modest fortune they'd built through careful saving and smart investments over 47 years of marriage. As David's BMW pulled out of her driveway, followed by Tommy's reluctant pickup truck, Meredith remained at the window. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. A 72-year-old woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that had seen through countless deceptions in her teaching career. But this deception cut deeper than any she'd faced in a classroom. This was her own family, her own blood, systematically working to destroy her independence and steal her future. Meredith Caldwell had spent her career teaching children the difference between right and wrong. Now it was time to teach her own children that lesson, whether they wanted to learn it or not. The war for her dignity had begun, and she intended to win it. The war for her dignity had begun, and she intended to win it. But first, Meredith needed to understand exactly what she was fighting. The house felt different after her children left, not emptier, but charged with new purpose. She moved through the familiar rooms with the methodical precision that had made her one of the most respected principals in the district. If David and Sarah wanted to play games with documentation and evidence, they'd chosen the wrong opponent. Meredith had spent decades investigating everything from plagiarized papers to elaborate cheating schemes, and she knew how to build an airtight case. She started in Harold's study, where he'd kept their financial records with the same military precision he'd learned in Vietnam. The filing cabinet was exactly as he'd left it. Color-coded folders, chronological organization, every document in its proper place. David had asked about Harold's insurance papers, which meant he'd been thinking about this for a while. But insurance payouts had been settled years ago. What he really wanted was access to their investment accounts and her monthly pension. Meredith pulled out the bank statements from the past 6 months and spread them across Harold's mahogany desk. At first glance, everything looked normal. Automatic deposits, utility payments, grocery purchases. But as she examined each statement more carefully, patterns emerged that made her blood run cold. A check for $3,200 to home health services that she'd never authorized. A $1,800 withdrawal for medical equipment she'd never received. Smaller amounts, $200 here, $400 there, labeled as prescription copays, despite the fact that her Medicare covered most medication costs. Over 6 months, the unauthorized transactions totaled $47,000. Her hands trembled as she cross-referenced the check numbers with her own records. The signatures looked like hers at first glance, but under closer inspection, the loops were too round, the pressure too heavy. Someone had been practicing her handwriting, and they'd gotten good at it. The phone rang, interrupting her investigation. David's number appeared on the caller ID. "Hi, Mom. I just wanted to check on you after our visit. You seemed a little overwhelmed." There it was again, that careful, patronizing tone. But now she understood what he was doing. Every conversation was a test, designed to catch her in confusion or forgetfulness that could be documented later. "I'm fine, David. Just reviewing some paperwork." She kept her voice neutral, giving him nothing to work with. "What kind of paperwork? Maybe I could help." "You know how Dad always handled the finances." "Bank statements. I noticed some irregularities I wanted to check on." The silence stretched a beat too long. "Irregularities? Mom, sometimes when we're stressed or tired, normal transactions can look confusing. Maybe I should come over and help you sort through them." "That won't be necessary." I'm quite capable of reading my own bank statements. Of course you are. I just meant. I know what you meant, David. Her voice carried the authority that had once silenced entire faculty meetings. I'll call you if I need anything. She hung up before he could respond, her heart pounding. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. David mentioned you're confused about some financial records. As your daughter-in-law and a medical professional, I'm concerned this might be early signs of cognitive decline. We should discuss having a professional evaluation. Quote, the audacity of it took her breath away. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. Sarah was already building a medical case for incompetence, while David worked on the financial angle. Meredith walked to her kitchen window and looked across the yard to Eleanor Sutherland's house. Ellie had been her closest friend since Harold's death, the only person who'd understood the particular loneliness of losing a spouse after nearly 50 years together. If anyone would listen without judgment, it would be Ellie. She found her neighbor in the garden behind her house, deadheading roses with the same meticulous care she'd once applied to organizing the county library's reference section. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Meredith, how did the family visit go? Ellie straightened, brushing soil from her gardening gloves. At 69, she moved with the energy of someone 20 years younger, her silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. That's what I need to talk to you about. Meredith glanced around the empty yard, then lowered her voice. I think my children are trying to have me declared incompetent. Ellie's expression sharpened. What makes you think that? Meredith explained the staged incidents, the missing items, the questions designed to highlight confusion. She told her about the bank statements and the forged signatures, about David's photographs and Sarah's medical observations. My God, Ellie breathed. How long has this been going on? Months, maybe longer. I've been so focused on grieving Harold that I didn't see the pattern. Meredith's voice cracked slightly. They're stealing from me, Ellie. My own children are stealing from me and trying to convince everyone I'm losing my mind. Ellie's eyes blazed with the righteous anger of a woman who'd spent 40 years helping people find information and fight bureaucratic injustice. Those bastards, what are you going to do? I'm going to prove they're lying. But I need evidence, real evidence, not just my word against theirs. What kind of evidence? Meredith had been thinking about this since overhearing their conversation. I need to document everything. Every visit, every conversation, every suspicious transaction. I need to show a pattern of manipulation and theft. And how do you plan to do that? The same way they're documenting my supposed incompetence. I'm going to record them. Ellie was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. That's dangerous, Meredith. If they're really trying to have you declared incompetent, they're probably watching you closely. One mistake could give them exactly the ammunition they need. Then I won't make any mistakes. Meredith's voice carried the steel that had made her legendary among both students and faculty. I've been teaching for 35 years, Ellie. I know how to spot cheaters, and I know how to catch them in the act. That evening, Meredith sat in Harold's study with a yellow legal pad, creating a timeline of everything she could remember. The first suspicious transaction dated back 8 months, shortly after David's divorce was finalized and his child support payments began. Tommy's involvement seemed more recent, probably coinciding with whatever health issues had been troubling him. She thought about her youngest son's behavior during the visit, the guilt written across his features, his inability to meet her eyes. Tommy had always been the most tender-hearted of her children, the one who cried when he accidentally stepped on insects as a boy. Whatever David had convinced him to do, it was eating him alive. Her phone buzzed with another text, this time from Tommy. Mom, I'm sorry if we upset you today. We just love you and want what's best for you. The message felt different from David's calculated manipulation or Sarah's clinical detachment. This sounded like genuine remorse, like a man wrestling with his conscience. Maybe Tommy could be turned, made to see what his brother was really doing. But first she needed proof. Meredith pulled out Harold's old address book and found the number for Marcus Webb, the elder law attorney who'd helped them with their estate planning 5 years ago. If David was serious about pursuing guardianship, he'd need legal representation, and if she was going to fight back, she'd need to understand exactly what she was up against. "Mr. Webb? This is Meredith Caldwell. Harold and I worked with you on our estate planning." "Yes, that's right. I have a question about guardianship proceedings. If someone wanted to have me declared incompetent, what would that process look like?" Webb's explanation was sobering. A concerned family member could petition the court for guardianship if they could demonstrate that the person was unable to manage their own affairs. Medical testimony would be crucial, as would evidence of poor judgment, confusion, or inability to handle finances. "Mrs. Caldwell, may I ask why you're concerned about this? Has someone threatened guardianship proceedings?" "Not threatened exactly, but I think my son might be exploring options." "I see. Are you having any difficulties managing your affairs?" "Absolutely not. But someone has been forging my signature on checks and making unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough to make her wonder if the call had dropped. "Mrs. Caldwell, if what you're telling me is true, that's financial elder abuse. It's a felony in Texas. Have you reported this to the police?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure of my facts first. I understand your caution, but you should know that financial abuse often escalates. If someone is willing to forge your signature and steal your money, they may be planning more serious interventions." After she hung up, Meredith sat in the gathering darkness of Harold's study, surrounded by the evidence of their life together: photos of family vacations, his military commendations, her teaching awards. 47 years of marriage, 4 children raised, a lifetime of memories and hard work. And now her own children were trying to take it all away. The house settled around her with the familiar creaks and sighs of old wood and older memories. But for the first time since Harold's death, Meredith didn't feel alone. She felt focused, determined, and absolutely furious. David thought he was dealing with a confused old woman who could be easily manipulated. Sarah believed her medical credentials and cold calculation gave her an advantage. Tommy was torn between loyalty and guilt, making him potentially vulnerable. But none of them understood who they were really fighting. They weren't facing a grieving widow slowly losing her grip on reality. They were challenging a woman who had spent decades outmaneuvering teenagers, managing faculty politics, and solving problems that would have stymied lesser minds. Meredith Caldwell was about to give her children the education of their lives, whether they wanted it or not. Meredith Caldwell was about to give her children the education of their lives, whether they wanted it or not. But first, she needed the tools to teach that lesson. The next morning dawned gray and humid, typical for East Texas in early September. Meredith sat at her kitchen table with her second cup of coffee and a notebook filled with careful observations from the previous day. Every detail mattered now. The time David had photographed her kitchen, the exact questions Sarah had asked about her medications, the guilt that had flickered across Tommy's face when he'd found her reading glasses upstairs. She'd learned long ago that the best defense against manipulation was documentation. In her teaching career, she'd maintained detailed records of every parent conference, every disciplinary action, every instance of suspected cheating. Those records had saved her career more than once when angry parents or ambitious administrators had tried to challenge her decisions. Now she would apply the same methodical approach to exposing her children's scheme. At 9 sharp, she heard Ellie's distinctive knock. 3 quick raps followed by 2 slower ones, a code they developed during their weekly bridge games. Meredith opened the door to find her friend carrying a large purse and wearing the determined expression she'd worn when battling the county commissioners over library funding cuts. "I've been thinking about our conversation all night," Ellie said without preamble. "If we're going to do this, we need to do it right." She settled at Meredith's kitchen table and opened her purse, revealing what looked like a small electronics store. Tiny cameras no bigger than shirt buttons, audio recorders disguised as everyday objects, and a tablet computer that looked far more sophisticated than anything Meredith had seen. "Ellie, where did you get all this?" Her friend's cheeks colored slightly. Amazon mostly, and, well, you remember my grandson Tyler? The one who's studying computer science at UT? I called him last night and told him I was writing a mystery novel that involved surveillance equipment. He was very helpful. Meredith picked up one of the tiny cameras, marveling at its size. This actually works? Tyler walked me through everything over video chat. The cameras connect to your home Wi-Fi and record directly to cloud storage. The audio recorders can pick up conversations from across a room. And this tablet will let you monitor everything in real time or review recordings later. The implications were staggering. While David and Sarah were busy staging incidents to make her appear confused, she could be documenting their every move, their every conversation. Isn't this illegal? Not in your own home. Texas is a one-party consent state, which means you can record conversations you're part of. And these devices in your own house? Perfectly legal. Ellie's eyes glinted with the satisfaction of someone who'd done her research. I may have retired from the library, but I still know how to find information. They spent the next 2 hours planning camera placement with the strategic thinking of military commanders. The kitchen, where most family conversations happened. The living room, where David had been photographing. The front hallway, to capture arrivals and departures. Even the dining room, where important family discussions traditionally took place. Ellie proved surprisingly adept with the technology, her librarian's attention to detail serving them well as she programmed each device and tested the connections. Tyler said the key is making them invisible but effective. We want angles that capture faces and voices without being obvious. Meredith found herself thinking like the educator she'd always been, anticipating her children's behavior patterns. David would gravitate toward the kitchen. He'd always been most comfortable there, leaning against the counter while talking. Sarah would prefer the living room, where she could maintain more formal distance. Tommy would probably stay near the door, ready to escape if things got uncomfortable. We need to test this, Meredith said as they finished installing the last camera, hidden behind a picture frame that had sat on her mantel for 20 years. I want to make sure everything works before they come back. Ellie positioned herself in the kitchen, while Meredith went to the living room, speaking in normal tones about everyday topics. The tablet screen showed crystal-clear video from multiple angles, and the audio was sharp enough to pick up their whispered conversation from across the house. My God, Meredith breathed. They'll never see this coming. Now for the most important part, Ellie said, pulling out a small notebook. Documentation. Every recording needs to be dated, labeled, and backed up immediately. We need timestamps, descriptions of what was discussed, and notes about any suspicious behavior. Meredith nodded, remembering the detailed incident reports she'd written as a principal. I'll keep everything in Harold's study. They wouldn't think to look there. David always said Dad's filing system was too complicated to bother with. As if summoned by their conversation, her phone rang. Sarah's number appeared on the screen. Mrs. Caldwell? I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday about your medication management. Meredith glanced at Ellie, who gestured toward the tablet. Everything was recording. My medication is fine, Sarah. I've been taking the same prescriptions for 3 years without any problems. I understand, but sometimes as we age, our bodies process medications differently. And with the stress of living alone, it's easy to double dose or forget doses entirely. I'd like to come by later today and review your pill schedule, maybe set up one of those weekly organizers. The offer sounded reasonable, caring even, but Meredith now understood the subtext. Sarah wanted to document confusion about medications, perhaps even introduce mistakes that could be blamed on cognitive decline. That's very thoughtful, but unnecessary. My doctor is quite satisfied with my current routine. When was your last appointment? I could call Dr. Peterson's office and request your recent labs, just to make sure everything is optimal. A chill ran down Meredith's spine. Sarah was fishing for medical information, probably planning to use her professional credentials to access Meredith's health records. Sarah, I appreciate your concern, but my medical care is private. I'll discuss any changes with my doctor directly. Another pause, longer this time. Of course. I just want to help. David and I were talking this morning, and we thought it might be good for you to have some company today. Maybe Tommy could come by and help with any heavy lifting or yard work? They were planning another visit, another opportunity to stage incidents and gather, quote, evidence. But now Meredith was ready for them. That would be nice. I do have some boxes in the attic that need to come down. Perfect. He'll be there around 2. After Sarah hung up, Meredith looked at Ellie with grim satisfaction. They're coming back. Tommy this time, probably to plant more evidence or move things around. Are you ready for this? Meredith thought about Harold, about the life they'd built together, about the trust and love she'd invested in her children for nearly 5 decades. Then she thought about the forged signatures, the stolen money, the calculated manipulation designed to strip away her independence and dignity. I've been ready for this since I was 25 years old and had to handle my first cheating scandal, she said. The only difference is that this time, the cheaters are my own children. She spent the rest of the morning preparing, reviewing the camera angles, and testing the recording systems one more time. In Harold's study, she created a file folder labeled Insurance Correspondence. Boring enough that David wouldn't want to examine it closely, but which actually contained her growing documentation of their scheme. At exactly 2 o'clock, Tommy's pickup truck pulled into her driveway. Through the hidden cameras, Meredith watched him sit in the cab for nearly 5 minutes, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if trying to summon courage. When he finally emerged, his shoulders were slumped with the weight of whatever he'd been asked to do. "Hey, Mom," he said when she opened the door. His smile was forced, and he couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Sarah said you needed help with some boxes in the attic?" "That's right. Just a few things I want to bring down for donation." She led him through the house, acutely aware that every step was being recorded. "How are you feeling, honey? You looked tired yesterday." His step faltered slightly. "I'm fine. Just been working a lot of overtime, trying to save up for." He trailed off, clearly having said more than he intended. "Save up for what?" "Nothing important. Just some medical stuff." They'd reached the hallway where the pull-down attic stairs were located. Tommy reached for the cord, but Meredith stopped him. "Before we do this, I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth." He froze, his back still turned to her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know what's been happening, Tommy. I know about the moved keys, the missing money, all of it." Her voice was gentle but firm, the same tone she'd used when giving students one last chance to confess before facing serious consequences. Slowly, Tommy turned around. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking. "Mom, are you in some kind of trouble? Because if you need money for medical bills or something else, you could have just asked me. You didn't need to." She gestured vaguely, letting him fill in the blanks. For a moment, she thought he might break down and confess everything. His eyes filled with tears, and his mouth opened as if to speak. But then his phone buzzed, and she saw David's name on the screen. The moment of truth passed, and Tommy's expression hardened into reluctant resolve. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom. We're just worried about you, living alone in this big house, managing all Dad's paperwork." He pulled down the attic stairs with more force than necessary. "Let's just get these boxes, okay?" But as he climbed into the attic, Meredith saw him discreetly move her jewelry box, the one that contained her grandmother's pearl necklace and Harold's wedding ring, from its usual spot on her dresser to a less secure location on top of her bureau. It was subtle, probably intended to suggest she was becoming careless with valuables, but the hidden cameras caught every movement. When they came back downstairs with 2 boxes of old books, Tommy's phone rang. "Yeah, I'm here now," he said, turning away from Meredith as if that would provide privacy. "No, everything's fine. She seems, I don't know, maybe a little confused about where things are." He was reporting back to David, providing real-time updates on her supposed condition. Meredith felt a stab of betrayal so sharp it took her breath away. This was her baby, the child she'd rocked through countless nights of fever and nightmares, and he was actively participating in a scheme to destroy her. But she kept her expression neutral, continuing to sort through the books as if she hadn't heard every word. After Tommy left, promising to check on her again soon, Meredith sat in Harold's study and reviewed the recordings. The video was clear, the audio sharp, and the evidence damning. Tommy moving her jewelry box. His phone conversation reporting her, quote, confusion, the nervous guilt written across his features throughout the entire visit. She labeled the files methodically. Tommy Visit 1, jewelry box relocation, evidence planting. Each recording was backed up to 3 different locations, with timestamps and detailed notes about what had occurred. But the most valuable evidence was yet to come. Because now she understood their pattern, their methods, their timeline. David was escalating, bringing in legal representation and building a medical case through Sarah's professional credentials. They needed more dramatic evidence of her incompetence, which meant they'd have to take bigger risks. And when they did, she'd be ready to capture every word, every action, every betrayal on high-definition video. The student had become the teacher, and class was about to begin. The student had become the teacher, and class was about to begin. But Meredith's first lesson would come from an unexpected source. 3 days after Tommy's visit, David called with news that made her stomach clench with dread and anticipation in equal measure. "Mom, I've arranged for us to meet with an attorney tomorrow. Marcus Webb? He specializes in elder law and estate planning. I thought it would be good to review Dad's arrangements and make sure everything is in order." Meredith gripped the phone tighter, her mind racing. She remembered Webb from their estate planning session 5 years ago, a meticulous man with kind eyes and a reputation for ethical practice. If David was bringing in legal counsel, he was accelerating his timeline dramatically. "Why do we need an attorney, David? Harold and I took care of everything years ago." "I know, but things change. Your needs are different now, and some of the legal language might be outdated. Webb can explain everything in simple terms so you're not confused." There it was again. The assumption of confusion. The implication that she couldn't understand complex information. But this time, every word was being recorded by the tiny device Ellie had hidden in her cordless phone's base station. "I wasn't confused when we set up the estate plan, and I'm not confused now." "Of course not. I just meant, look, can we not argue about this? I'm trying to help you, Mom." "We all are." After hanging up, Meredith immediately called Webb's office herself. If David was planning to use the attorney to build a case for incompetence, she needed to understand what she was walking into. "Mr. Webb, this is Meredith Caldwell. My son David has arranged a meeting for tomorrow, and I wanted to clarify the purpose." Webb's voice was cautiously professional. "Mrs. Caldwell, your son contacted me about reviewing your current legal arrangements and discussing potential guardianship options." "Guardianship options?" "He's expressed concerns about your ability to manage your affairs independently. He's requested an evaluation to determine whether legal guardianship might be in your best interests." The words hit her like a physical blow. David wasn't just stealing money or staging incidents anymore. He was moving to have her declared legally incompetent, which would give him complete control over her finances, her property, her very life. "Mr. Webb, I want to be clear. I have not requested this meeting and I do not consent to any guardianship proceedings." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Caldwell, may I ask, are you experiencing any difficulties managing your daily affairs? Any confusion about finances or medications?" "Absolutely not. But I am experiencing unauthorized withdrawals from my bank accounts and other concerning behavior from my family members." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. Mrs. Caldwell, given what you've just told me, I think it would be best if you came to tomorrow's meeting with independent legal representation. Is that necessary? In my experience, when family members petition for guardianship over someone who doesn't believe they need it, conflicts of interest arise very quickly. You may want to protect yourself." That evening, Meredith sat in Harold's study with the yellow pages, looking for attorneys who specialized in elder law defense. Most of the ads focused on estate planning or nursing home issues. But one small listing caught her eye. Catherine Morrison, attorney at law. Defending your right to independence. She called and left a message, explaining briefly that she needed representation for a guardianship evaluation she didn't want or consent to. Morrison called back within an hour. "Mrs. Caldwell, based on what you've described, this sounds like potential elder abuse. Are you safe right now?" "I think so, but I'm not sure for how much longer." "I can meet with you first thing tomorrow morning, before your appointment with Webb. We need to discuss your rights and review any evidence you might have." Morrison turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in exactly the kind of case Meredith was facing. When Meredith showed her the documentation of unauthorized transactions and described the staged incidents, Morrison's expression grew increasingly grim. This is financial abuse, potentially fraud, and definitely a conspiracy to deprive you of your civil rights. The fact that they're involving a nurse practitioner to provide medical justification makes it more serious. What can we do? First, we're going to that meeting with Webb, and I'm going to make it very clear that you're not a vulnerable elderly woman who can be manipulated. Second, we're going to request that any evaluation be conducted by an independent medical professional, not someone connected to your family. And third, Morrison smiled grimly, we're going to let them hang themselves with their own rope. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock at Webb's office, a converted Victorian house not far from downtown. Meredith arrived early with Morrison, who insisted on reviewing the setup before the others arrived. Remember, Morrison said as they waited, answer honestly, but don't volunteer information. If Webb asks about your daily routines, tell him exactly what you do. If he asks about finances, refer him to your bank statements and receipts. Don't let them characterize your answers as confusion. David arrived precisely on time, with Sarah at his side. His confident smile faltered when he saw Morrison. Mom, who is this? Catherine Morrison, Mrs. Caldwell's attorney, Morrison said before Meredith could respond. I'm here to ensure her interests are protected during this evaluation. Sarah's professional mask slipped slightly. We weren't told she would be bringing counsel. Mrs. Caldwell is entitled to legal representation, especially in proceedings that could affect her civil rights, Morrison replied coolly. Webb entered his conference room looking distinctly uncomfortable. I wasn't expecting this to be an adversarial proceeding. It doesn't have to be, Morrison said, as long as everyone remembers that Mrs. Caldwell is the client here, not her son. David's jaw tightened. I'm trying to protect my mother. She's been having memory problems, confusion about finances, difficulty managing her daily affairs. Specific examples? Morrison asked. She couldn't find her keys or reading glasses during our last visit. She seemed confused about bank transactions. She's been having trouble maintaining her house. Dirty dishes, disorganized papers. Webb turned to Meredith. Mrs. Caldwell, have you been experiencing any of these difficulties? Meredith looked directly at him, her voice steady and clear. Mr. Webb, my keys were moved from their usual location while my son was visiting. My reading glasses were taken from the living room and placed upstairs, also during his visit. The bank transactions I was questioning were unauthorized withdrawals that I discovered when reviewing my statements. My house is lived in, not dirty. She pulled out a folder Morrison had helped her prepare. These are my bank statements showing the unauthorized transactions. These are my medical records from my recent physical, showing no cognitive decline. These are references from my former colleagues and current neighbors attesting to my mental competency. Webb reviewed the documents with growing interest. Mrs. Caldwell, these bank statements show some concerning irregularities. Have you reported these to your bank? I'm in the process of filing a fraud report. David leaned forward. Mom, you're misunderstanding those transactions. Some of them were expenses I handled for you, with your permission. Which ones? The medical equipment? The prescription copays? I never received any medical equipment, and my prescriptions are covered by Medicare. Meredith's voice remained calm, but her eyes were steel. David, do you have receipts for these purchases you claim to have made on my behalf? David's confident facade was cracking. Not with me, they're at home, Sarah jumped in. Mrs. Caldwell, from a medical standpoint, it's quite common for people in early stages of cognitive decline to forget arrangements they've made. The brain often creates false memories to fill in gaps. Morrison's pen was moving rapidly across her legal pad. Ms. Chen Caldwell, are you providing a medical evaluation of Mrs. Caldwell? Because I don't see any record of her being your patient. No, I'm just explaining that. Then please limit your comments to factual observations, not medical interpretations. Webb was studying the bank statements more carefully. Mr. Caldwell, these signatures don't look consistent. Mrs. Caldwell, is this your signature on this check for $3,000? Meredith examined the check carefully, aware that everything she said was being recorded by the tiny device in her purse. "No, it's not. Someone has forged my signature." The room fell silent. Webb looked from the check to David, then back to Meredith. "Mrs. Caldwell, are you alleging that someone in your family has forged your signature on bank documents?" "I'm not alleging anything. I'm stating a fact. That is not my signature." David stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Mom, you signed that check. I was there when you did it. You were paying for home health services." "I have never used home health services. And I would never sign a check for $3,000 without keeping a record of what it was for." Tommy, who had been silent throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke up. "She's right. About the signatures, I mean." All eyes turned to him and his face flushed red. I've seen David practicing writing like Mom. He said it was for Christmas cards, but..." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at Tommy in horror, while David's face went through a series of expressions: shock, fury, and finally cold calculation. Tommy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's been having his own problems lately: health issues, financial stress. He's confused. But Webb was already making notes, and Morrison was smiling slightly. Tommy's inadvertent confession had just blown their entire scheme wide open. "Mr. Webb," Morrison said quietly, "I think we need to discuss the possibility of filing criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud." Webb nodded slowly. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm going to recommend that any guardianship evaluation be postponed pending a full investigation of these financial irregularities. And I'm withdrawing as counsel for your son as there appears to be a significant conflict of interest." David's mask finally slipped completely. "You can't do this, Mom. You're making a mistake. You need our help, whether you want to admit it or not." Meredith looked at her eldest son, the boy she'd nursed through pneumonia at age 6, the teenager she'd bailed out of jail after a stupid prank, the man she'd helped through his divorce, and saw a stranger driven by desperation and greed. "David, the only mistake I made was trusting you." As they left Webb's office, Morrison walked Meredith to her car. "That went better than I hoped. Tommy's confession gives us concrete evidence of fraud. But you need to be careful. Desperate people do desperate things." Meredith thought about the hidden cameras in her house, the recorded conversations, the growing file of evidence in Harold's study. "I'll be careful. But I won't be intimidated." That evening, she reviewed the recording of the meeting, transcribing the most damaging statements word for word. Tommy's confession, David's defensive lies, Sarah's attempted medical manipulation, Webb's growing suspicion, and ultimate withdrawal. She was building a case that would not only protect her from their guardianship scheme, but potentially send them to prison. The question was whether they would realize how much trouble they were in and back down, or whether David's desperation would drive him to even more dangerous measures. Given what she now knew about her son's gambling debts and the people he owed money to, Meredith suspected the answer would be the latter, which meant the most dangerous part of this battle was yet to come. Given what she now knew about her son's gambling debts and the people he owed money to, Meredith suspected the answer would be the latter, which meant the most dangerous part of this battle was yet to come. She was right. The first sign of escalation came 2 days after the disastrous meeting with Webb. David arrived unannounced at 7 in the morning, his usual polished appearance replaced by wrinkled clothes and bloodshot eyes. Through her hidden cameras, Meredith watched him pace her front porch for several minutes before finally ringing the doorbell. "David, what are you doing here so early?" He pushed past her into the house, his movements agitated and desperate. "We need to talk, Mom, about what happened at Webb's office." "There's nothing to discuss. You tried to steal my money and have me declared incompetent. The evidence speaks for itself." "You don't understand." His voice carried an edge she'd never heard before, pure panic barely held in check. "You can't file those fraud charges. You can't destroy the family over this." Meredith kept her voice steady, aware that every word was being recorded. "I didn't destroy anything, David. You did." He spun around, his eyes wild. "Tommy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's sick, Mom. Really sick. He needs money for treatment. And he's not thinking clearly." "What kind of treatment?" Cancer. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors say he has maybe 6 months without surgery, and the surgery costs more than he can afford. David's voice cracked, and for a moment, the old vulnerability she remembered from his childhood flickered through. I was trying to help him. We all were. The revelation hit Meredith like a physical blow. Tommy was dying, and she'd had no idea. But even as her heart broke for her youngest son, her mind remained sharp enough to recognize manipulation. If Tommy needs money for medical treatment, why didn't you ask me directly? Why steal it? Because you would have said no. You would have insisted on talking to doctors, getting second opinions, taking control of everything like you always do. His voice was rising, desperation bleeding through the words. I needed to help him quickly, quietly. By forging my signature and lying to attorneys. David's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with the haunted look of a man being hunted. I have to fix this, Mom. You have to drop the charges. I can't do that. You can. You're his mother. You're my mother. Family protects family. Family doesn't steal from family, David. His phone buzzed again, more insistently. This time he answered it, turning away as if privacy were possible in her small kitchen. Yeah, I know. I'm working on it. No, she won't listen. I need more time. His voice dropped to a whisper, but the hidden microphones caught every word. She's not as confused as we thought. She's got lawyers now. When he hung up, his face had gone pale. Mom, you don't understand how serious this is. The people I owe money to, they're not patient. If I can't pay them back. The unspoken threat hung between them like smoke. Meredith felt her first real stab of fear. The recordings, Part 6. The unexpected alliance. The unspoken threat hung between them like smoke. Meredith felt her first real stab of fear. But before she could respond, her phone rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. Mom? Jennifer's voice was breathless, as if she'd been running. I'm at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. My flight was early. I'll be there in 2 hours. David's face went white. Jennifer's coming here? Now? I didn't know you were planning a visit, Meredith said, keeping her voice level despite the chaos erupting in her kitchen. It was last minute. I had some vacation time, and I wanted to see you. Is that a problem? Meredith watched David pace frantically, his phone buzzing with increasing urgency. No, sweetheart. It's perfect timing. After she hung up, David grabbed her arm with enough force to leave marks. You can't tell her about any of this. Jennifer doesn't understand the situation. What situation? That you've been stealing from me and trying to have me declared incompetent? She'll ruin everything. Jennifer's always been the golden child, the one who never needed help. She doesn't understand what it's like to be desperate. Meredith pulled free from his grip, anger overriding fear. Get out of my house, David. Before your sister gets here and sees what you've become. He left without another word, but not before she caught him palming her spare house key from the kitchen drawer. The message was clear. This wasn't over. Meredith immediately called Detective Rosa Martinez, whose business card Catherine Morrison had given her. Martinez was part of the Sheriff's Department's Elder Abuse Unit, and Morrison thought she should be informed about the escalating situation. Mrs. Caldwell, based on what your attorney told me, I've been expecting your call. Are you safe right now? I think so. My daughter is coming for a visit, which should provide some protection. But Detective Martinez, there's something you need to know. My son is involved with dangerous people. He owes money to someone who's putting pressure on him. Loan sharks? I think so. He took my spare key when he left this morning. I'm afraid he might come back when I'm not here. I'll increase patrols in your neighborhood. And Mrs. Caldwell? If you feel threatened in any way, call 911 immediately. Don't try to handle this alone. Jennifer arrived exactly 2 hours later, her rental car pulling into the driveway as Meredith watched through her front window. At 45, her daughter still moved with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations in her work as a social worker. But there was something different about her today. A tension in her shoulders that suggested this wasn't just a casual visit. Mom, you look wonderful, Jennifer said, embracing her with genuine warmth. I've missed you so much. They settled in the living room with tea, Jennifer's trained eye automatically assessing her mother's appearance and surroundings. Meredith could practically see her daughter cataloging details: the clean house, the organized papers, the clear speech and sharp responses to questions. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Are David and Sarah pressuring you about your living situation?" The question caught Meredith off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "Because David called me 3 weeks ago. He said you were having memory problems, getting confused about money, struggling to maintain the house. He wanted me to support his decision to look into nursing homes." Meredith felt her pulse quicken. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd need to see for myself before agreeing to anything that dramatic. That's why I'm here." Jennifer's eyes were sharp with professional skepticism. "But Mom, you seem completely fine. If anything, you seem more alert and focused than when I talked to you at Christmas." "Because I am fine. David has been lying to you." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the analytical skills that had made her successful in social work. "Tell me everything." Meredith led her daughter to Harold's study and showed her the files: the bank statements, the forged signatures, the legal documentation from Webb's office. She explained about the staged incidents, the moved items, the systematic campaign to make her appear incompetent. "My God," Jennifer whispered, sinking into Harold's old chair. "This is textbook elder abuse. I've seen cases exactly like this in my practice." "There's more." Meredith pulled out the tablet that controlled her surveillance system. "I've been recording everything." Jennifer watched the footage of Tommy moving her jewelry box, David's phone conversation about documentation, Sarah's attempts to introduce medical justification for incompetence. With each video, her expression grew more grim. "Mom, you need to report this to Adult Protective Services immediately. And you need to consider that Tommy might be in on this more than you think." "Tommy's sick, Jennifer. David says he has pancreatic cancer, that he needs money for treatment." Jennifer's professional mask slipped, revealing raw pain. "Mom, Tommy doesn't have cancer. I talked to him last month about his annual physical. He's fine." The revelation hit Meredith like a physical blow. Even Tommy's medical crisis was a lie, another layer of manipulation designed to justify their theft and gain her sympathy. "They've been lying about everything," she said quietly. "Everything," Jennifer confirmed. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Before Meredith could answer, they heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the study window, they watched Tommy's pickup truck park behind Jennifer's rental car. But Tommy wasn't alone. David was with him, and both men looked agitated and desperate. "Jennifer's here," Tommy said as they approached the front door. "What are we going to tell her?" "We stick to the story," David replied, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. "Mom's getting confused, and we're concerned about her safety. Jennifer will understand once she sees the evidence." Jennifer looked at her mother with new understanding. "They don't know you've been recording them. And they don't know you're here to help me instead of them. Then we have an advantage." Jennifer's social worker training was kicking in, the same skills she used to investigate family dysfunction and abuse. Let's see how far they're willing to go with their lies when they think they have a sympathetic audience. The doorbell rang, and Meredith felt a surge of confidence she hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. For the first time since Harold's death, she wasn't facing her children's manipulation alone. She had an ally who understood both the tactics being used against her and the legal framework needed to stop them. The real confrontation was about to begin. The recordings. Part 7. The Dangerous Game. The real confrontation was about to begin. Meredith positioned herself in the living room while Jennifer retreated to the kitchen, maintaining the illusion that she'd just arrived and hadn't yet spoken privately with her mother. Every camera was recording, every microphone active. David's face lit up with relief when he saw Jennifer through the front window. "Jenny, thank God you're here. We've been so worried about Mom." Tommy followed behind his older brother, his guilt so obvious that Meredith wondered how she'd missed it before. His eyes darted around the room, unable to settle anywhere, especially not on her face. "David? Tommy?" Jennifer's voice carried just the right note of concern mixed with professional calm. "Tell me what's been happening." David launched into his prepared narrative with the polish of someone who'd rehearsed it extensively. Mom's been having more and more confusion. She can't keep track of her medications, she loses things constantly, and she's becoming paranoid about her finances. Paranoid how? She thinks someone's been stealing from her bank account. She's convinced that legitimate expenses we've helped her with are somehow fraudulent. David's voice carried the perfect mixture of sadness and frustration. Yesterday, she even accused me of forging her signature on checks. Jennifer nodded sympathetically, playing her role perfectly. That must be very difficult for all of you. Mom, do you remember signing these checks David is talking about? Meredith looked directly at her daughter, choosing her words carefully. I remember every check I've signed, Jennifer, and I know my own signature. Tommy shifted uncomfortably. Mom, sometimes when people get older, their memory. Tommy, Jennifer interrupted gently, when we talked last month about your annual physical, you mentioned everything was fine. How are you feeling now? The question hung in the air like a trap. Tommy's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, panic, then a desperate look toward David for guidance. What do you mean? David told me about your cancer diagnosis. I'm so sorry I didn't know. When did the doctors discover it? The silence stretched until it became painful. Tommy's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, while David's face cycled through emotions too quickly to track. There's been a misunderstanding, David said finally. Tommy's waiting for test results. We're hoping it's not cancer. Jennifer's professional mask never slipped, but Meredith could see the cold fury building behind her daughter's eyes. I see. So there's no definitive diagnoses yet? That's right, David said too quickly. We've been so worried about both of them, Mom's confusion and Tommy's health scare, that maybe we haven't been communicating clearly. It was smoothly done, Meredith had to admit. David was backpedaling from the cancer lie while maintaining his narrative about her supposed incompetence. But Jennifer wasn't finished. David, can you walk me through these financial concerns? I work with elderly clients all the time, and sometimes these issues have simple explanations. David pulled out a folder he'd prepared, filled with bank statements and photocopied checks. Here's the documentation. You can see the pattern of confusion: expensive medical equipment she doesn't remember ordering, prescription copays that don't make sense, home health services she claims she never used. Jennifer examined the papers with professional thoroughness. These signatures look a bit different from Mom's usual handwriting. The pressure seems heavier, and the letter formation is slightly off. Well, that's what happens when people get older. Sarah's voice came from the doorway. None of them had heard her arrive. Fine motor control deteriorates. Handwriting changes. It's perfectly normal. Sarah entered the room with the confident stride of someone used to being the medical authority in any discussion. Jennifer, it's so good to see you. I'm glad you're here to help us figure out the best care options for your mother. Care options? Assisted living facilities, nursing homes, that sort of thing. Places where she'd have professional supervision for her medications and daily activities. Sarah's tone was reasonable, caring, everything Meredith had once believed it to be. Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. That's a big decision. Have you had her evaluated by a geriatric specialist? We've been trying to arrange that, but she's been resistant to medical evaluation, David said. She gets agitated when we suggest it. I'm not agitated, Meredith said firmly. I'm opposed to being treated like an incompetent child when I'm functioning perfectly well. Sarah pulled out her phone, ostensibly to check the time, but Meredith noticed the recording app was open. They were still documenting her supposed confusion, even now. Mom, nobody thinks you're incompetent, David said in the patronizing tone that made her teeth clench. We're just worried about your safety. If you're worried about my safety, maybe you should explain why you took my spare house key this morning. The accusation landed like a bomb in the quiet room. David's face went pale, and Tommy looked like he might be sick. I didn't take any key. Then check your pocket. David's hand moved involuntarily toward his jacket pocket, then stopped. The gesture was small, but Jennifer caught it, her trained eye missing nothing. David, Jennifer's voice carried a new edge, maybe you should empty your pockets. This is ridiculous. I'm not on trial here. No, but Mom might be, if you keep pushing for guardianship proceedings. Jennifer stood up, her social worker authority fully engaged. So let's be completely honest with each other. Show me what's in your pockets. Tommy broke first, as Meredith had known he would. David, we have to stop this. Jenny knows something's wrong. Look at her. She's not buying any of it. Shut up, Tommy. No, I won't shut up anymore. This is wrong, and you know it. Tommy turned to Jennifer, tears streaming down his face. We've been moving things around to make her look confused. We've been taking money from her accounts. David's been practicing her signature for months. Sarah tried to salvage the situation. Tommy's been under a lot of stress lately. He's not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, Tommy interrupted. Mom's not confused. She's not incompetent. We are. David's phone buzzed with the insistent urgency they'd all learned to recognize. This time he answered it right in front of them, his desperation overriding caution. I told you, I need more time. She's not going to sign anything. No, I can't just… What do you mean other options? The person on the other end was speaking loudly enough that they could all hear fragments. Tired of waiting. One way or another. Tomorrow night. When David hung up, his face was ashen. I have to go. David, Jennifer stood between him and the door. We need to finish this conversation. There's nothing to finish. This family meeting is over. He pushed past her toward the front door, but turned back at the threshold. Mom, you have 24 hours to reconsider pressing charges. After that, I can't control what happens. The threat was explicit now, no longer hidden behind concern for her welfare. As David's car peeled out of the driveway, Meredith felt the full weight of how dangerous this situation had become. Her son wasn't just stealing from her anymore. He was being pressured by people who might be willing to hurt an elderly woman to collect a debt. Her son wasn't just stealing from her anymore. He was being pressured by people who might be willing to hurt an elderly woman to collect a debt. But Meredith Caldwell had spent 40 years teaching teenagers that actions have consequences, and tomorrow night, David would learn that lesson. After David's threatening departure, the house felt charged with electricity. Tommy collapsed into Harold's old recliner, his face buried in his hands, while Sarah stood frozen by the window as if trying to decide whether to flee or fight. Tommy, Jennifer's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to crisis intervention, I need you to tell me everything. Not just about the money, about David's debts, about who's threatening him, about what they might do to our mother. Tommy looked up with red-rimmed eyes. You don't understand, Jenny. These aren't normal creditors. David got involved with some guys from Houston, loan sharks who finance gambling operations. He owes them over $200,000. The number hit Meredith like a physical blow. Her entire life savings wouldn't cover David's debts, even if she'd been willing to give it all to him. How long has this been going on? Jennifer asked. About a year. Maybe longer. His insurance business has been failing since the divorce, and he started gambling online to try to make quick money. When that didn't work, he borrowed from these guys to cover his losses. Tommy's voice was hollow with despair. They gave him 6 months to pay it back. That deadline is tomorrow. Sarah finally spoke, her voice sharp with panic. This isn't my fault. I never agreed to anything involving dangerous people. David said it was just about getting Mom the care she needs. Bullshit, Jennifer snapped. You've been drugging our mother and providing false medical testimony. You're in this up to your neck. Meredith watched the confrontation with grim satisfaction. Her children's alliance was crumbling under pressure, exactly as she'd seen happen with cheating students when faced with consequences. But there was no time to savor the victory, not with David's deadline looming. We need to call Detective Martinez, she said. And we need to do it now. Mom, wait, Tommy pleaded. If David gets arrested, if he can't pay these guys back, they might come after all of us. They know where you live. Then we make sure they don't have any reason to come after us, Jennifer said grimly. We end this tonight. Meredith was already reaching for her phone. Detective Martinez? This is Meredith Caldwell. I need you to come to my house immediately. And you might want to bring backup. While they waited for the police, Meredith gathered every piece of evidence she'd collected. The bank statements, the recordings, the video footage. Tommy's signed confession that Jennifer had helped him write. It was an overwhelming case of elder abuse, financial fraud, and conspiracy. "There's something else," Sarah said suddenly, her professional composure finally cracking completely. "David made me prepare something. A cocktail of sedatives that would—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "That would what?" Jennifer demanded. "That would make her death look natural. Like an accidental overdose from medication confusion." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "He said if we couldn't get guardianship, if the legal route didn't work, we might need other options." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Harold's old mantel clock. Meredith felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Texas evening air. Her own son had been planning to murder her. "Where are these drugs now?" "In my car. In my medical bag." Sarah looked broken, aged 10 years in the space of an hour. "I never thought it would go this far. I just wanted financial security for my kids." Detective Martinez arrived 20 minutes later with 2 patrol officers and a crime scene technician. She was a compact woman in her late 30s with the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty to be surprised by anything. "Mrs. Caldwell, your attorney filled me in on the basics, but I understand the situation has escalated." Meredith led her through the evidence methodically, the same way she'd once presented disciplinary cases to school board members. The financial records showing systematic theft. The recordings of David and Sarah discussing their timeline and documentation. The video footage of staged incidents designed to make her appear incompetent. Martinez's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases I've ever seen. The premeditation, the sophistication of the scheme. This is felony territory." "There's more," Jennifer said, guiding Martinez toward Sarah's car. The medical bag contained enough concentrated sedatives to kill several people, carefully measured into syringes, and labeled with Meredith's name and fabricated prescription information. Martinez photographed everything before sealing it as evidence. "Ms. Chen Caldwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, financial fraud, and attempted murder." As Sarah was handcuffed and read her rights, Tommy broke down completely. "I never knew about the drugs. I swear I never knew David was planning to hurt her physically. I just thought we were going to scare her into signing over financial control." "Mr. Caldwell, you're also under arrest for financial elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud." Meredith watched her youngest son being led away and felt her heart break for the boy he'd once been, even as she recognized the necessity of holding the man he'd become accountable. "What about David?" Martinez asked. "He'll be back," Meredith said with certainty. "His deadline is tomorrow night. He's desperate enough to try anything now." Martinez nodded grimly. "We'll be ready for him. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm going to station officers around your house tonight. And I want you to consider staying somewhere else until we can arrest your son." "No." Meredith's voice carried the steel that had once silenced entire faculty meetings. "This is my home. Harold and I built our life here, and I won't be driven out by my own child's greed and desperation." "Mom," Jennifer started to protest. "I'm not leaving, Jennifer. But I am going to finish this." Meredith looked at the detective with the same determination that had carried her through 4 decades of challenging teenagers. "David thinks he's dealing with a confused old woman who can be intimidated or eliminated. Tomorrow night, he's going to learn exactly how wrong he is." Martinez studied her for a long moment, clearly recognizing the steel beneath the silver hair. "What do you have in mind?" "I'm going to give him one last chance to confess and cooperate. And when he refuses, I'm going to show him and his criminal associates that they picked the wrong family to threaten." As the police cars pulled away with Sarah and Tommy, Meredith stood in her doorway, looking out at the quiet street where she'd lived for nearly 50 years. Tomorrow night would determine whether she kept her independence and dignity, or whether David's desperation would destroy them both. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't afraid. She was furious, and she was ready to fight. The stage is set for David's return and the ultimate resolution. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't afraid. She was furious, and she was ready to fight. David never came. At 11:47 p.m., Detective Martinez received a call that would end the confrontation in a way none of them had anticipated. David Caldwell had been found in his BMW on a back road outside Houston, beaten nearly to death by the loan sharks who'd grown tired of waiting for their money. Meredith sat in her kitchen at midnight, still wearing the wire that Martinez had insisted on, still surrounded by the hidden cameras that had documented her children's betrayal. Jennifer paced the floor while 2 patrol officers maintained their watch outside, all of them waiting for a showdown that would never come. "He's in critical condition at Houston Methodist," Martinez explained, her phone still warm from the call. "Broken ribs, collapsed lung, severe head trauma. The doctors aren't sure if he'll make it through the night." The news hit Meredith with an unexpected complexity of emotions: relief that the immediate threat was over, horror at the violence her son had faced, and underneath it all, a profound sadness for the choices that had led them all to this moment. "What happens now?" Jennifer asked. "Your brother's associates got what they wanted. They sent a message about what happens when you don't pay debts. Whether David survives or not, they're done with him. The threat to your mother is over." Meredith removed the wire with hands that shook slightly, not from fear, but from the emotional exhaustion of 48 hours that had changed everything she thought she knew about her family. "And the legal case?" "Ironclusive. Between the recordings, the financial evidence, Tommy's confession, and the murder weapons we found in Sarah's car, we have enough to convict everyone involved." Martinez's expression was grim but satisfied. Sarah's already trying to negotiate a plea deal. Tommy's lawyer is pushing for leniency based on coercion, but he'll still face significant time. Jennifer collapsed into the chair across from her mother, looking older than her 45 years. "I can't believe it went this far. I can't believe they were actually planning to kill you." "I can." Meredith's voice was steady, though her heart felt broken. "I've seen what desperation does to people. I've watched good students cheat because they were afraid of disappointing their parents. I've seen teachers falsify records because they needed their jobs. Fear makes people do terrible things. This went beyond fear, Mom. This was greed and selfishness." "Yes, but it started with fear." Meredith looked out the window at the empty street where she'd raised her children, where they'd learned to ride bikes and play with neighborhood friends. David was always afraid of not being good enough, of not living up to expectations. That fear drove him to make increasingly desperate choices. Martinez gathered her equipment and prepared to leave. "Mrs. Caldwell, you'll need to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. But I want you to know, your documentation and evidence gathering made this case. Without those recordings, it would have been your word against theirs." After the detective left, Meredith and Jennifer sat in the quiet house, surrounded by the remnants of a family that had been torn apart by betrayal and desperation. "What will you do now?" Jennifer asked. "Live my life. The same life I was living before they tried to take it away from me." Meredith's voice carried a new strength, forged in the crucible of the past week. "I'm 72 years old, Jennifer. I don't have time to waste on regret or revenge. Will you visit David? If he survives?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and complicated. Meredith thought about the boy who'd brought her dandelions when she was sad, the teenager who'd called her when he was scared and alone at college, the man who'd held her hand at Harold's funeral. I don't know, the David the first raised died somewhere between his first gambling loss and his decision to forge my signature. I'm not sure who's lying in that hospital bed. Jennifer reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't here when this started. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. You're here now. That's what matters." They spent the next hour dismantling the surveillance system, removing the tiny cameras and audio devices that had captured the destruction of their family. It felt symbolic somehow, putting away the tools of documentation and evidence, returning the house to a place of privacy and peace. 3 weeks later, Meredith stood in the courthouse hallway waiting to testify at Sarah's plea hearing. Sarah had agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing detailed testimony about David's planning and manipulation. Tommy had been sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. He'd wept as he apologized to Meredith, begging for forgiveness she wasn't yet ready to give, but might someday find. David had survived his beating, but remained in a coma. The doctor said there was brain damage, though they couldn't predict the extent until he woke up, if he woke up. Catherine Morrison appeared beside her in the hallway, carrying a briefcase full of documents that would ensure Meredith's financial security and legal protection going forward. "The bank has agreed to reimburse all the fraudulent withdrawals," Morrison reported. "And we've established multiple safeguards to prevent anyone from accessing your accounts without explicit authorization." "What about David's victims in Houston? The people he owed money to?" "That's not your responsibility, Mrs. Caldwell. You were a victim too." But Meredith knew it wasn't that simple. The ripple effects of David's choices had spread far beyond their family, touching other victims, other families, other lives destroyed by desperation and greed. As they entered the courtroom for Sarah's hearing, Meredith felt the weight of how much her world had changed. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a lonely widow struggling with grief. Now she was a survivor, a victim who'd fought back, a woman who'd refused to be silenced or eliminated. The judge called Sarah's case, and Meredith prepared to tell her story one more time, not as the confused elderly woman her children had tried to create, but as the sharp, determined educator who documented their crimes and brought them to justice. Justice was complicated, messy, and incomplete. But it was still justice, and she'd fought for it with every tool at her disposal. Justice was complicated, messy, and incomplete. But it was still justice, and she'd fought for it with every tool at her disposal. 6 months later, Meredith Caldwell stood at a podium in the Dallas Convention Center, looking out at an audience of social workers, law enforcement officers, and elder abuse advocates who had come to hear her story. "My name is Meredith Caldwell, and I'm here to tell you that being 72 doesn't mean being helpless." The opening line drew scattered applause, but Meredith could see the skepticism in some faces. Another elderly victim sharing her sad story. They had no idea what they were about to hear. "6 months ago, my own children tried to steal my life savings, have me declared incompetent, and when that failed, they planned to murder me and make it look like an accident." Now she had their full attention. Jennifer sat in the front row, beaming with pride as her mother commanded the room with the same authority she'd once wielded in faculty meetings. Next to her sat Detective Martinez, who'd become not just an ally but a genuine friend in the months since the case concluded. Meredith told her story methodically, the same way she'd once taught lesson plans, with clear objectives, supporting evidence, and a conclusion that left no room for doubt. She explained the warning signs she'd missed initially, the manipulation tactics her children had used, and most importantly, how she'd fought back. The key was documentation, she emphasized, clicking to a slide showing one of her hidden cameras. These people count on their victims being dismissed as confused or paranoid. They count on families being embarrassed to involve outsiders. They count on silence. A hand shot up in the audience. "Mrs. Caldwell, wasn't using surveillance equipment risky? What if your children had discovered it?" "Everything about fighting back was risky. But the alternative was losing my independence, my dignity, and ultimately my life." Meredith's voice carried the steel that had made her legendary among both students and faculty. "I decided that if I was going down, I was going down fighting." After the presentation, Meredith was surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories or ask for advice. An elderly man whose daughter had been manipulating his prescription medications. A woman whose son had been forging her signature on checks. A social worker dealing with a case remarkably similar to Meredith's own experience. What would you tell someone just beginning to suspect their family is taking advantage of them? Asked a woman about Meredith's age, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "Trust your instincts," Meredith replied without hesitation. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. And document everything. Dates, times, conversations, financial transactions. Build a case the same way you'd build any argument you wanted to win." As the crowd dispersed, Detective Martinez joined Meredith at the coffee station. "You know, you missed your calling. You should have been a detective." "I was, in a way. 35 years of investigating whether teenagers had really written their own essays." Meredith smiled, but it faded as she thought about the work still ahead. "Rosa, how many cases like mine are out there right now?" How many elderly people are being victimized by their own families? More than we can count. And most of them don't have your education, your resources, or your fighting spirit. That conversation had planted the seed for what came next. 2 weeks later, Meredith sat in the office of a nonprofit attorney, reviewing the paperwork to establish the Caldwell Foundation for Elder Justice. The foundation would provide resources, education, and direct assistance to elderly victims of family abuse. The foundation will offer 3 main services, Meredith explained to the attorney. Educational workshops to help people recognize the warning signs of elder abuse, technical assistance in gathering evidence and documentation, and financial support for legal representation when families can't afford it. Jennifer had moved back to Texas permanently, taking a position with the state's Department of Family and Protective Services to head up their new elder abuse prevention initiative. Mother and daughter worked together now, combining Meredith's practical experience with Jennifer's professional expertise. "I never imagined my retirement would involve becoming an activist," Meredith told Jennifer as they reviewed grant applications for the foundation's first year of operations. "Harold would be proud of you, Mom. You've turned something terrible into something that will help thousands of people." Harold. Meredith still talked to his photograph every morning, updating him on her new purpose. Sometimes she wondered what he would think about the hidden cameras, the recordings, the methodical ways she'd destroyed their children's schemes. But she knew he would approve of the foundation, the advocacy work, the determination to help others avoid what she'd experienced. Tommy had been released after serving 18 months of his sentence. He'd written her several letters from prison, expressing remorse and asking for forgiveness. Meredith had read each one carefully but hadn't responded. Some wounds needed more time to heal. Sarah had received 3 years and was already out on parole, working as a nurse's aide in a nursing home, a job that would allow close supervision of her interactions with elderly patients. The irony wasn't lost on Meredith. David remained in long-term care, the brain damage from his beating having left him with the cognitive function of a child. Meredith visited him once a month, reading to him from books he'd loved as a boy, watching for any sign of the son she'd raised. Sometimes she thought she saw recognition in his eyes, but the doctors said it was wishful thinking. On this particular evening, 6 months after her first speaking engagement, Meredith sat in Harold's study, reviewing the foundation's first annual report. They'd helped 127 elderly victims in their first year, provided legal assistance to 89 families, and trained over 1,000 professionals in recognizing elder abuse. The phone rang, the same phone where she'd first suspected David was recording her confusion. Now it brought calls from grateful families, requests for speaking engagements, and updates from Detective Martinez about new cases they were working together. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is Maria Santos from Houston. I heard you speak last month, and I think my mother is in the same situation you were in. Can you help me?" Meredith reached for a fresh legal pad, the same kind she'd used to document her children's betrayal. "Tell me everything that's been happening, Maria. And don't leave out any details." As she began taking notes, Meredith felt the satisfaction of purpose that had defined her teaching career. She was educating again, fighting for justice again, protecting vulnerable people who needed an advocate. The Victorian house around her held the same memories of love and loss, but now it also held something new: hope for the future, determination to make a difference, and the quiet satisfaction of a woman who'd refused to be silenced. At 73, Meredith Caldwell was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote.